Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Hannah, so Sustainability Project Manager for the Lancaster West Neighbourhood team. Hopefully a few of you have been to these sessions before, so kind of know how they run. But we have started running these sessions as a way of raising like awareness and understanding around a range of issues kind of around sustainability. Just because, so hopefully, obviously, a lot of you will be aware that RBKC have set a target for the council to become carbon neutral by 2030 and for the borough to become carbon neutral by 2040. And on Lancaster West, we've also set a target for the estate to become carbon neutral by 2030 and have a whole range of other goals around how we can become more sustainable, but in ways that can also like improve people's lives, support well-being, and yeah, help make the borough and Lancaster a better place. So one really important topic on that is all around air quality, because this is something that links quite a lot to climate change. So a lot of the causes of climate change are also a lot of causes of poor air quality, which particularly in London, I'm sure a lot of us are aware, is quite a serious issue. And is something that actually has a massive impact on our health. So today we're lucky enough to have Dr Hisham Abubakar-Waziri, who's a clinical fellow from National Heart and Lung Institute at Imperial College, who's currently doing, I think that's right, you can correct me if I'm wrong, who's doing a project called Inhale, which is looking at some of the links between air quality and some like health issues and people focusing on West London. So it's a really interesting project and really linked to a lot of the work we're doing. Just in terms of like agenda for today, so obviously doing a quick introduction now. In a minute I'll pass you over for the presentation, which covers a lot about what the causes of air quality are, what the impacts are, and some ways that we can all work to kind of improve air quality. And then at the end, we should have around 20 minutes for questions. I think as usual, if you have a question throughout, then if you could save it for the end, that'd be great. And then feel free to put your hands up at the end and I can ask you to come off mute and you can ask questions, or if you just want to put it in the chat if you prefer, then I can read it out for you. But if everyone could stay on mute kind of throughout, just so like the recording and everything's fine and it's not too distracting, that'd be great. And then if you miss some of the session, it'll be going live on our website and on YouTube after, so you can watch it back or share it with anyone else you think might find it interesting. But yeah, now I'll pass over. So I'll stop presenting, and then if you want to share your screen, then yeah, we can go from there.
Sure, no problem. Thank you so much for that. So I'll just start sharing my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Can you guys see that?
Up for me, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you very much for that, Hannah. Lovely to meet you all, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Hisham. I am a medical doctor by training, having trained at Imperial College in London. And at the moment, I'm currently working as a clinical research fellow in the National Heart and Lung Institute, which is affiliated with the Royal Brompton Hospital and Imperial College. And I'm very, very fortunate enough to be working on this big project called the Inhale project, which very, very importantly highlights and is looking to really determine how the significant levels of pollutions or just our general exposures and to pollution can have a significant impact on our health. But not only that, we're doing a lot of work with different universities, such as the University of Surrey and University of Edinburgh, to try and really better characterize what the pollutants are, what their composition is, what they're made up of, and also try and identify ways in which we can hopefully mitigate this. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So roughly the talk itself should be around about half an hour, 25 minutes. And it'll be fairly simple in that I'm going to start off with a very brief overview of what pollution is, what we define it as, and what the different types of important pollution are, and how I'm going to talk about a few select pollutants which we know are detrimental to our health. And after, I'll even discuss a case that some of you may be familiar with, in which a young girl unfortunately suffered significant consequences to persistent pollution exposures in London. And moving on from that, I'll then talk about how some of the things that we can do to try and mitigate air pollution. And then I'll lastly finish off by telling you a bit about the Inhale project, focusing mainly on the clinical aspect, which is where I'm working. So what is air pollution? So really, it's just pollution itself is defined as the release of anything that's harmful or noxious or poisonous to any specific environment or its inhabitants. And when we're talking about air pollution, of course, what we are referring to is these things being released into the air. And globally, pollution has had such a significant impact. And the WHO states that between 2 to 4 million people each year die prematurely because of the effects of air pollution. And if we look at this graph, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse cursor. The major causes of death come from, heart and vascular related problems as well as lung problems. So people dying from heart attacks, people dying from strokes, people developing high blood pressure as a result of pollution exposure, as well as just overall inflammation in lungs, increased risk of lung cancer, and increased risk of chest infections. And these are just, the top 5 health causes of death, although there are many more. And when we look at the different sources of pollution that lead to this, it really very much depends on what type of area you live in. With us that live in London, of course, we are more exposed to pollutants that are released, from sort of, either factories or power plants or any sort of, fumes from all these industrial buildings in central London. But the biggest source of pollutants that we have in London is from congestion from traffic. Now, if you were to live in a rural area, yes, the air in theory is a bit cleaner, but there are also other sources of pollution. For example, specific agricultural practices, people driving tractors because they use diesel. Burning of oh, sorry, I just moved forward. Burning of lots of wood and sometimes grass or any sort of green infrastructure can also lead to the production of pollution. And what is important to remember that although these are quite different areas in terms of the density of people and the type of buildings and the sources of pollution there, you can get pollution being produced within a city that can actually, because of wind, be blown into even rural areas. So regardless, pollution is bad. And can reach far and wide and causes detrimental effects. Now, despite having lots and lots of pollutants, we've identified in the last 20 years or so 4 major harmful pollutants. And these are the 4 that are listed in front of us. They can be classified into particulate matter, which I will go into detail in the next few slides. We've got nitrogen dioxide, which is mainly produced by traffic, so by combustion of fossil fuels. So this nitrogen dioxide is mainly very high in cities, as well as what we call volatile organic compounds and ozone, which I will talk about in the next few slides. So starting off with particulate matter. What is particulate matter? Particulate matter just basically refers to very, very tiny particles that we cannot necessarily see, but we inhale. And what I've got here again, I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor, but you've got this gray little what looks like a pipe, and that really is representative of a strand of hair. So this is, imagine that's a strand of hair. That's how thick the strand of hair is, and right next to that you've got grains of sand from a beach, from a fine sand beach. Now, particulate matter relative to that, you can see is significantly smaller than even these. So we measure particulate matter in micrometers. 1 centimeter is the equivalent of 10,000 micrometers, just to give you an indication as to size. And these blue balls indicate particulate matter that's around about 10 micrometers or less. We also are able to identify even smaller particles than that, which are 2.5 and less. And these smaller particles are the most important, as you will see on the next slide. So this is just really to give you an idea as to how small these particles are. And it's pretty much anything or anything. It could be dust, it could be liquid droplets, etc. Now, the reason why size matters in terms of particulate matter is because the smaller the particles, the deeper it gets into your lungs. So starting from the left, which is the biggest size, if you inhale this, for example, you're out on the street and I don't know, a car drives past you, some of the dust that's sort of resuspended in the air from the road, you inhale, but it's mainly consisted of very coarse particles that deposit in your upper airway. So that's, either in your mouth or your throat, or, just about to your voice box, but it doesn't really get into the lungs. But when you come to smaller sizes, which is the pink ball that we can see zoomed in here, that actually gets much deeper into your lungs. And because it gets deeper into your lungs, it can cause, damage, it can cause inflammation and some breathing problems. Now, if you go even smaller than that, then you get more uniform deposition into the entire lungs. And if you go even smaller than that, then some of these particles can actually act like a gas and pass into the bloodstream. And that's why we think actually having these particles getting into the bloodstream, it causes damage to the blood vessels, increases your risk of things like stroke, things like heart attacks, etc., etc. So that's particulate matter. Nitrogen dioxide is particularly important and relevant for us as well, living in a dense city where there's a lot of traffic. It's mainly produced by fossil fuel combustion, and really nitrogen dioxide levels is an indicator of how dense the traffic is in a particular region. And a lot of studies have shown that people in areas where there's high levels of nitrogen dioxide, or people who are exposed to nitrogen dioxide, they tend to, it stimulates an inflammatory process in your lung, and also can reduce your lung function, can make you more wheezy, and it's particularly bad for patients with asthma. Now, volatile organic compounds. Now, this is anything that essentially is volatile at room temperature. So and by volatile, I mean it's a gas at room temperature. So if you think of like perfumes, you think of it's something that's the solvents, paint, nail varnish, etc. These, of course, we can smell them. They are also pollutants, and I think with certain people, when they inhale these organic compounds, it can also lead to inflammation. Because of the nature of these compounds, i.e. they're volatile and they're gases, they tend to be sourced indoors, but you can also get outdoor sources that are released into the atmosphere, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And then lastly, we have ozone. Now, some of you might think, okay, ozone actually is good. This is what we've been taught in school or on other platforms. And I'm not talking about the ozone that protects us from the UV light from the sun. That is in a completely different level. It's not. It's in a different sort of stratosphere, basically. What I'm talking about is ground level ozone, i.e. ozone that you and I will be exposed to and can breathe. And ozone is formed when you get a number of pollutants, be it from traffic, be it from chemical factories, etc., or even just household activities like heating. These compounds are released into the atmosphere, and they consist of oxygen. And when they react with UV light, it causes them to react together and create ozone. And the reason why ozone is bad is because it contributes to increased temperature. It does contribute to global warming, and climate change. It affects vegetation, but not only that, it also is associated with really bad lung function, inflammation, hypertension, and it's been associated in some studies with increased hospital attendances with people who have asthma or other lung problems. And all of this sort of ties in together. This is a good schematic that I found in a journal online, and it's a good summary as to how pollution, climate change, and health interact. So, looking at the left side, so this is a city, basically, that produces strong amounts of pollutants, which include greenhouse gases. Now, us at the ground level, we inhale all the pollution produced by all these activities, and we have all these detrimental health effects, which the WHO has reported, and a number of studies have shown. But not only that, the greenhouse gases also released into the atmosphere affects our climate. So from the CO2, from the ozone, from the compounds that I mentioned earlier, you get changes within the climate that leads to, global warming, increased level of ground level ozone, and with increased heat and depletion of the good ozone layer, which protects us from UV light, you then get, increased levels of ozone, which then heats up the planet, leads to more natural disasters like wildfires, which then increases the amount of particles that are in the air. And it just creates this sort of vicious cycle whereby we are creating pollution, we're making the climate worse. As the climate changes, you get more pollution, and our health just becomes worse and worse and worse. So clearly, we're in a position that is not sustainable at all. And both, the pollution and the production of greenhouse gases, we need to get down to sustainable levels, not just for the climate, but for our health and survival as a species. Now, not only does it affect our health, but it affects us socially and socioeconomically. And this is just basically a table that I got from a study done by the European Public Health Alliance in 2018. And they looked at the total damages in costs, in social costs by pollution in the major cities in Europe. And surprise, surprise, unfortunately, London is the one that incurs the highest cost. So it's the most costly to us financially, but also likely to be the most costly from a health point of view. So again, places like London need to lead the way in terms of going back to a more sustainable process. One of the most important pollutants in London, as I mentioned, is nitrogen dioxide, and that's because we've got huge levels of traffic. And this is basically a screenshot and a schematic that shows areas where there's high levels of nitrogen dioxide. So if it's blue or green, it's very, very low levels. When you're getting to the orange here and the red, orange basically suggests that you are in an area where you are above the maximum acceptable exposure levels, as defined by the WHO. So anything from Chelsea, Vauxhall. So I believe actually, you live in this area basically where there are very high levels of NO2, higher than is recommended. And this is very important as what I'll do is I'll just skip over this slide. Basically just says what the WHO guidance levels are, and I just wanted to highlight the red, which is the nitrogen dioxide levels, and anything that is in orange or the red, and I'm sure you can see red being on all the roads, there are levels that are higher than we should be exposed to. And this is very important because of a very unfortunate case in 2013 whereby a young 9-year-old asthmatic died from a very severe asthmatic attack and respiratory failure. And this is a very, very important case because this is the first case in history, really, that air pollution has been put down as a contributor to the cause of death in someone's death certificate. So for someone to have uncontrolled asthma, they need to, either go to hospital or go to their GP twice in a year. She went 27 times over 3 years, and really steps should have been taken to have avoided this had there been more awareness. And that red circle basically demonstrates the area in which she lived in. She lived about 25 meters away from the South Circular, which was a very, very busy, very congested, very polluted road that releases lots of NO2. And in in the coroner's inquest, basically, they, for the first time, they actually put down air pollution as a cause of death certificate, as a cause of death. So the way death certificates work, 1 refers to the cause of their death, and number 2 refers to any other problems they had. So 1A is the immediate cause of their death. So she died because her lungs failed. B, her lungs failed because she had severe asthma. And the reason why she had severe asthma is because of air pollution. So that's very, very significant. And she probably isn't the only case. Essentially, the coroner wrote that air pollution was a significant contributory factor to both the induction of her having asthma attacks, and it was likely that her mum wasn't given information about how important pollution was to causing people to have asthma attacks. If she had this information, she could have probably taken some steps to try and get her daughter out of that situation. So it's very, very heartbreaking, but again highlights the importance of air pollution. So what things can we do to try and reduce it? So a lot of things which I'm sure you guys are aware of. Main things are we want to reduce how much fossil fuels that we are combusting. So we need to invest in more energy efficient power and generation. We need to change the type of vehicles in which we travel in. We need to make these vehicles accessible as well. We need to improve waste management. We need to recycle more. That reduces how much waste we're burning, how many pollutants that we're releasing up into the air. We need to be able to make more energy efficient buildings, and adapt our technologies to needing less and less energy, essentially. And another important thing that has been done is this introduction of the ultra low emission zone, which started off in October 2019. So in 2019, it was just this orange area that was the ultra low emission zone. So people couldn't drive if they had into that region, if they had specific vehicles or they were amenable to a charge. And from October 25th, 2021, that area is going to expand. And I think that's very important because initially, when it was introduced within that area, in the first week, there was a 20% drop in the overall pollution levels, which is very, very important. So hopefully by expanding it now, yes, it's inconvenient for a lot of people, but it's going to lead to much better air, hopefully, within these regions. Another important thing for us to do is actually to utilize green infrastructure. Now, although the first point here, which is which looks at making sure that we have trees, which reduces the need for air conditioning, like in particularly warm countries. I think what is more important and what we focus on as well in the Inhale project is how important trees are in actually absorbing and taking out pollution from the air. So trees we know can absorb particulate matter and just drop overall pollution levels. So we need to be able to now strategically know how to build neighborhoods, how to change neighborhoods and fight as much as we can the pollution levels that we have. Now, that brings me on to the Inhale study and our rationale. So, of course, I've gone through, many reasons why pollution is bad, but still, we need a lot of research to really understand exactly why it affects us in the way it does. Why is it that you're more at risk of heart problems? What is it that causes that degree of inflammation? And what we're doing is we're monitoring people on an individual basis to determine how they respond to pollution. So we give people monitors, we let them go out and go about their business, and then we can monitor in real time what is their respiratory function, how is their breathing, what is changing, and that would then make things more tailored and help us really identify who is it that will responds badly to pollution or who can tolerate it a bit more. And if we're able to predict that, then we can possibly avoid situations like that 9-year-old girl earlier who was, of course, very, very sensitive to the pollution in her area. And the whole idea really is to predict who's at risk and hopefully come up with advice as to how we can then create infrastructure to mitigate the risk to everyone, and particularly those who are susceptible. So I don't want you to worry too much about this slide, but this is just an overview of how we do our study. So people come to visit us 5 times. So this is just V1, V2, V3 stands for visit 1, visit 2, visit 3. So the first visit, we get people to come in, we take some information, do some general tests, check their lung function, etc. And just make sure that they're okay to come onto the study. At their second visit, we do all those things again, but we also give them some monitors, which we then ask them to wear and go about their business. So on the third visit, they come back after 2 weeks and we do the same thing again. And then after 6 months, we repeat that process again in visit 4 and visit 5. So 2 monitoring periods, basically. And these are the devices. So to the left, we've got a device that we strap onto your chest. And what it is basically a sensor that detects the motion of your chest wall and is able to tell us how fast you're breathing and how deep you're breathing to an extent. And this device here to the right is what we call an air spec. And what it's got is a little fan at the bottom that sucks in the air that is around you and measures all the pollutants and tells us actually how polluted is the air in which you're at, in the area in which you're at. And this is the sort of information that we see. So we see your breathing rate, we see what the air quality is, and we also know what your activity levels are. And that lets us actually calculate what are your exposure levels, etc. And we've also got a GPS that actually tells us where you're walking and what the pollution levels are at that particular region. So the darker it is, the more the pollution is. And that's just to give an example. So the aim really of the project, and I'm just finishing up now, is really to determine the interaction between actually how pollution really affects us, and then not only how does it affect us, what can we do to mitigate this? How can we identify who is at risk, and what things can we put in place, which we can hopefully recommend at probably a government level. So to summarize on the key home messages, the take-home messages, pollution is a major contributor to disease worldwide, and it causes a lot more death than you would think. Not only that, it also accelerates the impact of climate change, which then accelerates the level of pollution. So it's a very, it's just basically just a downward cycle, and we're in a position now that it's not sustainable. We need to urgently reduce the pollution levels to something that is a bit more sustainable, because at this minute, the future is not looking very, very good. And we need to then improve our knowledge on how pollution affects us and how we can mitigate the impact of pollution. And that's the whole premise of the Inhale project. So I really thank you for listening. These are all the people so far, well, some of the people that are involved in the project. Claire, who is on the call as well. And my last slide really is we are, of course, looking for volunteers within the Borough of Kensington, Chelsea, or Borough of Westminster, who may look to get involved in the Inhale project. And I'll leave this up here, and I'm happy, of course, to email it to Hannah to pass on any information. But if you do want to get involved, and we would be more than happy to be in touch and hopefully get you as a participant into the study. So we're looking for either people who are completely healthy or asthmatics, but of course we can discuss that more. And that's it pretty much. Thank you very much. I'll just stop presenting.
That was great, thank you. I think that was really interesting, a good summary, and I think really brings to life like how much of an issue like the poor air quality in London actually is, and kind of the individual like impacts we have. Just to say, if anyone is interested in becoming part of like the Inhale study, then feel free to drop me an email, and I'm happy to like get you in touch and be a point of contact for that if helpful at all. Does anybody have any questions? And Rebecca, did you want to?
Hi, thank you for that. That was really interesting. I mean, I think a lot of it we're all really aware of, particularly like living in London. It's not a secret about how terrible the air is, and you know, some of the causes. And I think it can be really frustrating as an individual to know kind of what to do, because obviously, you know, you can't just move out the countryside and avoid the polluted air. And you know, we all worry about, you know, the lungs of our children and all that sort of stuff. And it just seems like the pace of change is way too slow for you know, the situation that we're in. And I personally feel like really powerless to do anything, that I can't actually, you know, what can I don't have a car, I cycle, you know, there's lots of things that I do, but what can we do as an individual living in the middle of these red zones, alarmingly, to protect ourselves and to make a difference?
Yeah, so that's a very, very good question. I think you've highlighted something that's very, very important. It's difficult to make such huge impact at an individual level, and I think you know, there's only so many steps that you can take other than actually moving yourself out of the situation where there's high concentrations of whatever pollutants there are. I think in terms of like personally, I for you, if you wanted to minimize the risk of having pollution, I think you're already doing one thing. You know, you, for example, you haven't got a car. You need to make sure that you've got, you know, good airflow within your flat. You can consider investing in one of those air purifiers, which literally actually purifies the air in and around you. One thing that I think the Inhale project is aiming to answer is, you know, just simple questions like, how does your commute affect, you know, your exposures? You know, some people of course, you know, they go on the underground. Some people take the bus. Some people walk to work. If two people walk to work, they may, even though they may end up going to the same place, there's specific routes that they take that minimizes their exposures. And actually, based on previous evidence, for example, if you're going to go somewhere, if you go where there is more greenery, then you are likely to be in an area where the pollution is less, simply, you know, for the reasons that I sort of mentioned. You know, trees and green infrastructure is important in actually taking pollution out of the air. But the bottom line is, you know, even if you take those steps of, you know, paying attention as to when you leave the home, you know, the type of transport that you use, whether it's walking or the route that you take to work, you know, you can do all of that to mitigate the responsible pollution, but the overall risk is there. And really, like you say, the pace at which we're trying to reduce the levels of pollution is far too slow. It's far too slow, and I think it's that community, is that big effort communally that will make a significant difference. To be honest, I'm sure you don't want to hear that, but that's that is the situation, unfortunately, and that's why we're doing the Inhale project.
I think that was a really good question, really good answer. I was actually going to ask a similar thing. I guess kind of it seems that individually, kind of the best things we can do are take the small steps to do our bit in reducing air pollution, but it's going to be a lot about kind of protecting yourself as well and looking at what we can do on that bigger scale, which obviously involves a lot of intervention by like government, by big organisations, things like that. I was also going to ask, So in terms of like the in-health study, what are kind of the plans of the next steps and kind of what you want to come out of it? Is it more kind of looking at the best pieces of advice that you can give people kind of based on what you learn, or is there anything else that you're keen to get out of it?
Yeah, so I think one of the big aims of, so there are lots of little aims. First of all, we want to really know in greater detail how pollution affects you. And a lot of the studies that were done before looked at just general levels of pollution. And I'm talking about, say, for example, you're measuring the pollution in Kensington, and you've got like stationary sensors, right, that tell you the overall pollution levels in Kensington. The bottom line is, okay, yes, Kensington may be very, very polluted, but two people that live in Kensington don't necessarily have the same exposure, depending on how, again, those things that I mentioned, how they get to work, what they do, how much time they spend outside. So although they can make associations as to how, okay, this are the levels of pollution and these are the overall health problems that we have, we don't know actually how specific that is. And that's what we're trying to be, is a bit more specific and try and personalize and know how pollution, not how pollution affects everybody, but how it affects you. So with that, of course, the first thing that we will be trying to get out of it is actually who is susceptible. How do we identify who's susceptible? Everyone is susceptible, but some people are more than others. The second thing is with the work that we're doing with the University of Surrey and our materials engineering department, we're looking at how important the important role that the green infrastructure plays, really, and the whole idea with that is to really then be able to make recommendations. Actually, this is what we need. Okay, this area is very polluted. We need to introduce this to try and help drop the levels, as well as all the other little steps that need to be taken to try and drop overall levels. So advice at a government level or just in terms of infrastructure, but as well identification, susceptibility level in terms of actual health and from a medical side of things. So those are the two main things that I would say.
Okay, great, that's really interesting. Just to let everyone know, I don't know, hopefully everyone can see the chat. Becky put something in the chat which is interesting, saying that if anyone wants to receive free air pollution forecasts, then you can sign up on a website there, which sounds like a good idea. And a really nice, accessible way of seeing how it changes and what sort of impact it can have. You can see that Michael has got his hand up as well. Did you want to come in, Michael?
Yeah, thanks for a very interesting presentation. I was wondering if the messaging here was presenting a paradox, because the first person to contribute is saying what can I do about this personally, and if the most sort of natural inclination would be, well, let's get the hell out of here, is that let's move to the country or to the suburbs, but there that you'll be relying far more on kind of polluting ways of transport, driving a car rather than public transport. I believe it's that housing in less denser areas is typically worse than in inner city areas. And so, is the response to say, well, we can make more of a difference, we can change this dynamic within the cities, rather than encouraging everybody to sort of spread out more thinly and actually increase the overall burden? I wondered what your thoughts on that were.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the issue is whether you say, okay, fine, the best way to not be exposed is to not be an area where you've got those exposures. But ultimately, that will lead to high levels of pollution wherever it is that you go. And I think what's most important and what will fix the problem is not to necessarily run away from it, and it's to, as you say, a big communal effort for us to actually drop levels down. There are so many things that need to be done, so many behaviors that need to be changed, and this is from decades and decades of practices and advances in technology. And unfortunately, it's not something that you can sort of and I'm sure you're very, very aware of it, it's not something that you can sort of reverse so quickly. So it's very, very tricky. It's very, very tricky, but it's at the same time, it's very, very clear. And what's essential is for us to increase awareness and increase education and highlight the importance and raise the importance of trying to tackle this issue. Because unless this is at the forefront, we will suffer the effects in the long run.
Thank you both. We've just got a few more comments in the chat. So one thing is, Becky said that the council's soon going to be consulting on its new air quality action plan. Kate has sent a clean air route finder, which I had no idea that existed. So that's really interesting, actually, and I think definitely, particularly for people who are kind of more susceptible to some of the like negative impacts of air quality, could be a really useful tool. We've also had another question in the chat from Hiran saying, is there any guidance for affected areas in terms of redevelopment, conversions and new builds, such as spacing between buildings, the number of floors on a proposed new build? I don't know if Hisham, if you know very much about that, if you want to give it a go.
I think that's a very good question, and it's probably something that I should look up. Honestly, I'm not aware of a specific guide. I know from our project, one of the professors who's actually who did some work in India. They've sort of devised a sort of a book, a little guideline, a book of guidelines as to what to do to try and minimize pollution in and around school, etc., etc. But in terms of what I can suggest or recommend that you see specific to that, honestly, I'm not aware. But I guess it's something that I can try and look up and then send you an email, if you want.
It's, I mean, Hisham, it's like you were saying that you're working with the University of Surrey. So
yeah.
Just in terms of materials, is there like any materials that you would suggest that we use, or apart from obviously things like trees, etc., in terms of design, is there anything else that we can think about? Maybe it's an architectural question rather than a question.
No, exactly. But and to be honest, I think, because I'm obviously it's a big multidisciplinary effort. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any specific thing, but I think that's a very, very good question. It's relevant, for me and the clinical aspect of the study. So I think I will have a look at. Well, I'll have a chat probably with one of the professors and ask him. And if there are, very good resources that I think would be very, very useful, particularly from the architectural side of things, then I will pass the information on to Hannah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's great. Kate has also just put in the chat there's some indoor air quality at home, some guidance for like ways of improving that through design, which could be helpful for that as well. I did see Claire just put her hand up, but I don't know if she's put it down, or I don't know if you wanted to jump in on that answer, Claire, or...
Yeah, just on that, we do, like Hisham was saying, one of our professors is more on the modelling side of things, and they've been starting to do some work on smart cities. So we might be able to dig out some details for that. I know they've got one project looking at kind of both indoor and outdoor spaces and air pollution and how that disperses, and I think that will lead on to guidance for urban planning. It's earlier stages at the moment, but hopefully, and Inhale should come out with more more guidance on that in the next year or so, hopefully. We're not quite there yet, still doing all the modelling to see how the air pollution disperses and across cities.
Okay, great. So very much a watch this space, and there could be more to come. It should be helpful for that. I can see, Michael, is your hand still up from your last question, or do we have another from you?
I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. I forgot to take it down, Hannah.
No worries. Thought I'd just check just in case. But we also have another question from Rebecca in the chat asking about face masks. So obviously a lot of us are wearing those a lot more often now. And does that help protect people against air pollution?
Again, that's a very good and very important question. And really, it depends on, again, the type of face mask. And what the most important pollutants, as we discussed, particularly with regards to particulate matter, are those that are very, very fine. So the regular face mask that you get, that's not FP3, just like the surgical face mask, they don't really offer you protection at all from pollution. The particles will be small enough to actually filter through and get in. And to be honest, they're not designed for that purpose anyway. They're designed to stop sort of quite sizable droplets or liquids actually getting to your mouth and you inhaling anything like that. That's why they're used in surgery, because of course a lot is going on and you don't want to be inhaling any of those compounds. You've got FP3 masks that do filter particles and filter aerosols, and those are probably the safest to use. But do they protect you from things like ozone or nitrogen dioxide? It's not very clear, to be honest. But I think it'll be interesting to actually look to see if there actually is there a face mask that's got that level of filtration that actually it filters out all pollutants. There are some that filter out most, but these are the big masks that we use in hospital or in the big type of gas masks that people use. But the current surgical, depending on what you use, if it's just a regular surgical face mask, unfortunately they don't.
Yeah, that's a really useful answer. Just think there's been obviously quite a few things through the pandemic which I feel have either affected levels of air pollution or kind of affected awareness of it as well. Because obviously with the lockdowns, a lot less people were out and about using cars more. But then I guess then after lockdowns, less people using public transport, more people using cars instead. Have you kind of through the Inhale project or just other research you've done seen, has there been any kind of clear impact on the pandemic on air pollution, or has it changed quite a lot, or has there been nothing conclusive? So
i.e. the pandemic affecting pollution, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So I mean, lots of studies have reported that clearly with people mainly staying at home, the pollution levels have dropped. And we've had sort of sensors that were out that measured pollution in and around South Kensington throughout this time. And of course, sort of in the process of still looking at that data. But overall, the less people are out, the less vehicles are out, naturally the pollution levels will drop. But now that things have started up again, it'll be interesting, as you say, whether or not there's a change into the composition of the pollution. Whether or not it's more people using cars, to try and avoid public transport, etc. We haven't fully analyzed that yet, except because we still got quite a bit to do. But that's something that we'll definitely, most likely be commenting on and looking at when we're looking at the data as a whole.
Sorry, my mute button didn't want to work there, but thank you. Yeah, that would be a really interesting one to have a look at what that impact actually looks like over time. If we're kind of going back to above the levels before, or if it's lower. Does anybody else have any questions before we start closing up? if you want to either put it in the chat or put your hand up. But if not, or while people are thinking, I was going to ask if Becky, actually, if you wanted to say anything quickly, sorry to put you on the spot, about the air quality action plan for RBKC, how that kind of links to all
More
of
than happy to. So yeah, we do have a current air quality and climate change action plan, but over the next few months, the council is developing separate air quality action plans, climate change action plans, and also a biodiversity action plan. And it is our intention to have these plans ready for consultation towards the end of October. And we would really welcome everyone's input on those actions that we're setting out, because yes, it is a real challenge how we're going to meet the World Health Organization guideline values, how we're going to become carbon neutral by 2030 as a council and then 2040 as a borough, and how we're going to increase biodiversity. And it really does take everyone to do what they can to help move us in that direction.
Thanks, Becky. And yeah, definitely, I think lots of us, either directly or indirectly, are obviously working in areas where you can have quite a lot of impact on what what air quality can actually look like, and ways that we can impact that and trying to reduce like negative impacts. So yeah, definitely a good one for everybody to feed into. Oh, Rebecca's just asked in the chat how we contribute to the plan.
So we will let everyone know. There'll be an internal news on Yama. There'll be external consultations with residents, organisations. We don't intend to go quietly. So hopefully it will be very easy and good signposting for you to feed in. But if anybody wants any information before then, please just send me an email.
Great stuff, thank you. Okay, unless anybody has any more questions, then I think we can start closing up now. But yeah, again, thank you so much, Hisham, for presenting. That was really interesting, and yeah, covered a lot of information, that some of which is stuff that you wouldn't necessarily, I think, have known or like thought about before. I think one of the ones that really stuck out to me was the one about like the economic impact on London and how like actually massive that is. It's really interesting. But yeah, thanks again. Just for anyone who wants to watch it back or share to others, we'll be uploading the slides and a recording of the presentation up onto YouTube and onto the W11 website, so anyone can watch it back. And if anybody has any questions after the session that you either comes to you at the end and you haven't had the chance to, then feel free to let me know. And Hisham, if that's all right, I'll pass any questions on to you.
Yeah, please. And definitely, you know, if anyone who wants to get involved, I'm sorry to take over, Hannah, but anyone who wants to get involved with the Inhale project, we are actively looking for people who are living in the boroughs of Kensington, Westminster, Hammersmith, etc., and Ealing. So feel free to come and get involved, see what your own exposures are like. And I think it's really adding to very valuable research that should hopefully be very, very impactful in the near future and for future generations as well. So please share and get involved. Thank you.
Definitely. Well, I think that's a good place to close. So thanks again, and thanks again everybody for joining. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
See you. Yeah, bye bye.
Thank you.